Welcome to this lecture on Bartók's pitch axis, where we'll look at the compositional opportunities afforded by this system. Now, as you can probably hear, Bartók's music can get a little bit spiky. I personally absolutely love it. But even if you have more consonant taste, you'll get something out of this system. It can be applied in a modernist, jazz and classical dissonant manner, or actually quite consonantly and diatonically. As ever, as a composer, it's up to you how to use it. Let's just get under the hood and see the mechanics at play, and then look at some compositional realizations and opportunities. Béla Bartók was a Hungarian composer of great skill, knowledge and productivity. He was unusual in that he was not only a wonderful composer and instrumentalist, but also an ethnomusicologist and analyst of great skill and contribution. He was also one of the first so-called Western classical composers to take seriously the art of folk music and not see it as some sort of lower art form. He actually was one of the first to go on field expeditions to record traditional music. Here's one of his recordings now, and he would be hugely influenced by that study, sometimes very overtly, as you can hear in this piano piece. We are going to take as a starting point this book from 1971 by Lendvai. Some of it is quite controversial as it's unsupported by evidence from Bartók himself, particularly the stuff about the Fibonacci sequence. However, the pitch axis concepts are really interesting, convincing and super useful compositionally. Here are the core principles of Bartók's pitch axis system, which will mean very little to us at this point, but there they are. Let's start here. If you imagine a typical classical key structure for a concerto, let's say, you might have key relationships that are related in terms of relative major and minor, or maybe a dominant key. So for example, you might have an opening movement in the key of F major, the middle movement in the key of D minor, and the final movement back to F major. That's simple and typical. Or you might have them in close fifth relationships. However, music by Bartók exhibited a really individualistic key structure. For example, this one here has a movement in A major, one in C major, one in F sharp major, and another in A major. It's not arbitrary though, that you can see that there is some structure there, particularly when you look at the middle sections of each of those movements, which seem to be in tritone relationships. What's going on? Well, let's look at key signatures and the familiar circle of fifths. If we take, for example, C major as our starting point, you can see that the closest key is the one that shares the same notes, A minor. So C major and A minor as keys are sort of equivalent. It's the R relationship in NRT, you may recall. C major and A minor. Also close is this key here, a fifth up. So that's G major, there's only one note difference. And in terms of the home key, you can see how close they are. And of course, G major is equivalent to E minor. So C major and E minor are close. And then we get more and more distant conventionally as we travel away through the major and minor keys from that center point. However, there's one small concept which completely disrupts this familiar cycle of fifths, and that's this: the idea that in some way major and minor may be equivalent or connected. Throughout Bartók's music, there is this recurring concept of a parallel major and minor chord, a sort of major-minor duality. Chords like this, which have a C minor and a C major, but at the same time. You'll hear this in Bartók's music, but also all Russian music since Rimsky-Korsakov, who theorized this and used it heavily. You'll hear it in Prokofiev's Romeo and Juliet. So right here, when the melody goes, that C sharp over an A minor chord. It's the most gorgeous sound. Another wonderful example comes from the opening of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, where you hear this C natural implying an A minor chord, and then this C sharp underneath, so surprising yet beautiful. Here's that moment again, slowed down. Yes. Now I could play you hundreds of examples, many from Bartók. Here are some that are listed. But just so that you have it really in your ear, there's this one sound which you may know from Jimi Hendrix. And this is what's really familiar to me. It's called the dominant 7 sharp 9. Now that's a dominant 7, and here's the sharpened 9th. A sharpened 9th is enharmonically the same as a minor 3rd. So what we have is a sort of major 3rd and a minor 3rd at the same time, with the 7th. That sort of major-minor duality is really well represented in that chord and has the flavour of this Bartokian harmony. So where does that leave us in terms of key relationships? Well, imagine we have the key of C major. We said previously that this is strongly connected to the relative minor, which is of course A minor. So C major and A minor are somehow bonded. But now in this Bartokian post-Rimsky-Korsakov and folk tradition, there is a bond also, not just between C major and A minor, but C major and C minor, the parallel minor. Remember this major-minor duality. So that means C and A minor are linked, but so are C and C minor. And because the relative connection is strong, C minor is also connected to E flat major. So we have a sort of wider family of chords connected to that C major. And of course that continues. So A minor is connected through the parallel relationship to A major, and E flat major to E flat minor. And those are connected to F sharp minor and F sharp major, or G flat minor and G flat major. So what you have here is C major belonging to a group of 8 chords or keys, which are interlinked through just 2 principles, that of relative and parallel connection. At this point, it would be useful to introduce what's known as a chromatic circle with the 12 notes of the chromatic scale arranged around in this rotary fashion. Now remember here that there's a major and minor equivalence, so these letters refer to major and minor keys or chords. As we saw before, C major belongs in a group of 8 keys or chords: C major, C minor, A major, A minor, E flat major, E flat minor, F sharp and F sharp minor. And looking at them on the chromatic circle, you can see this X. This is the axis here. So C is opposite F sharp, that's a tritone, and then a minor third away from E flat and A major, who in turn are a tritone away from each other. So if we imagine a piece or a section of music in the key of C major, we will call this the tonic group. So here's our first compositional implication, and also a way that we can understand Bartók's key structures. This tonic group would imply that there is some sort of linking equivalence or connection between chords a minor third and particularly a tritone apart. And as you can see with these keys here, the middle sections of each of these movements is a tritone apart, and the movements represent 3 of the 4 minor third relationships. In essence, you see the axis all over these key implications. And we see this kind of tritone substitution occurring in Bartók's music. This passage here, for example, there's a sequence of cycle 5 falling fifths of dominant chords, F sharp to B to E to A. You'd expect D at this point, and what we get is G sharp, a tritone away from that D. Now, if anyone studied any jazz harmony, you would know this sort of tritone substitution, but here it is in a different context. Here's the tritone substitution. And back. So we talked about the tonic group with its 8 major and minor keys. However, since there are a possible 24 from this perspective, it means we are missing 16 of them. So there must be other groups. So let's take a look at the circle of fifths again. If we have C at the top, then a fifth above it is G. We can think of G as belonging to the dominant of that tonic group. That makes sense. G resolving to C. And then a fifth above that we have a D, in this case major or minor. The dominant of the dominant is the subdominant. There's a fifth above this dominant or a fifth below the tonic again. So we have this cycle of tonic, dominant, subdominant. In fact, cadences in common practice tend to go this way: subdominant, dominant to tonic. So we have this cycle and this layout of these groups of tonic, dominant and subdominant. Now this repeats because of our axis. So this is Lendvai's notes, by the way. So what we see is this cycle of fifths being this repeated cycle of 3 groups, 8 in each, which make the 24. So we have the tonic group, which we saw at the beginning, C, A, E flat and F sharp. And then we have basically clock turns. The dominant, which includes G, its tritone substitution of D flat and B flat and E, and the subdominant, which is D, F, A flat and B. So to recap, we have a tonic group, a dominant group and a subdominant group. This means that if we want to create a sort of cadence of subdominant to dominant to tonic, we can use them in these sort of fields. We can interchange between these keys or chords. This is just what happens in a lot of Bartók's music. Here you can see that C major and F major are used as a sort of tonic space or field. And this is countered with a dominant. And then a subdominant area. Let's take stock again. Since we have these three groups, we can think of a set of cadences that we might use. I call these Bartók dominant functions. So, for example, if we wanted to get to C major or any of these chords, we could pick any of these onto any of these and resolve that way. But since this relationship is the same, we can just look from here to here. So we get familiar cadences like G to C, perfect cadence. We also get D flat to C, which you might know as a sort of tritone substitution or Phrygian cadence. We have an Aeolian cadence, B flat to C, and others that we'll look at. We can think of 4 movements, but then there are major and minor too, so it gives us 16 options. So from G to C, major or minor, so we can have G major to C major, G major to C minor, G minor to C major, which is that modal MNRT move, and G minor to C minor. We can give this an arrow. If you've done jazz harmony with me, you'll be familiar with this term, although we're using it in a kind of more expanded way. Now, any of these Gs can also be replaced by any chord within its group, which are at minor third intervals. So we could have G to C, major or minor, but also B flat, major to major, or B flat minor to C major. They're all beautiful. D flat major, a Phrygian or Girl from Ipanema thing, but then it also allows nice things like D flat minor to C major, just a slide, and then this E major or minor, let's do E minor to C major, which is an L move, or E major, which is our PL surreal thing. So just to recap of those 4 Bartók dominant functions, we can go down a fifth, and either end of that could be major or minor. We can give that an arrow. We could go up a tone, major and minor on either side, so there's 4 more. And you may recognize the Aeolian or deceptive cadence. We can go down a semitone, major and minor on each side, but we'll give it this, even though it's not strictly the way we use it in jazz harmony analysis. And finally, we need that PL surreal movement down major third. I don't have a symbol for this, so we'll give it a fish. So here they all are with familiar symbols you would get from NRT and modal implications. Try them all out. You can think of it this way. If we want to resolve a chord, we can consider it in the dominant group. So we could pick any of these 4, which is actually 8. It's G major, could be G minor. And then we can resolve this way to any on this axis. So we're going to do this sort of resolution. So we could pick, for example, E major. It's right here. And as we resolve it, we could resolve it to any of these other chords like C minor. This is beautiful, which I realize now is the H move. And these sort of resolutions can just continue endlessly around the axis in this way. Okay, so now we're going to get a bit brain melty. So the Bartók pitch axis actually connects to other concepts you know really beautifully. So, for example, if we take all these groups and lay them out not quite on that circle, but in a sort of spiral, this is known as a harmonic wheel. So this is the tonic group here: C major, C minor, C and A minor and A major. So you can see that these are relative and these are parallel. Relative, parallel, relative, whoops, parallel, relative, parallel. So this is the tonic group here. So if we were to resolve to that tonic group, we would use a dominant. In fact, I should say now there's nothing to stop us doing so-called plagal cadences, meta-plagal cadences this way. Let's stick here for now. So something like G to C. You see they've got their own compartments, so these are perfect cadences. G major to C major, E major to A major. But of course any of these can resolve to any of these here. Okay, ready for this? If you look carefully, you can actually see that this C major triad is spelt out for you, C-E-G, in this curved tonics. I know, C-E-G, C-E-A, A-E, C sharp, C-G-E flat. So our tonics is right here, and if we zoom in closer, we can see the NRT moves at play. For example, we can move within a group with R moves, flipping between these two, and it would be between these two and these two. So this sort of band or arc is the sort of relative flip. It's sort of like a bendy tonics. Parallel movements are this way: C major to C minor, A major to A minor, F sharp minor to F sharp major over here. So these bands are the bendy axis of an NRT on the P move, and leading tones across the boundary. They're sort of resolutions in this perspective. Yes, I knew that would hurt. So we can think of resolutions happening across this way, or across bands within the same spiral, or on arcs, and spinning continuously with a gravitational pull this way. If we return to the conventional view of the tonics, we can see the tonic group existing along this axis. Remember, it's about relative and parallel movements. Now, diatonic sounds are along this dimension. We've talked to this before, but this is a different musical view, and all are welcome. So we have C major and A minor in this relative view, and also the parallel of each. So the tonic group exists on this band. What about the dominant group? Well, it would be on the band with anything with a G major, and the subdominant would be here and here. Essentially, we have these stripes occurring across the tonics with a cadential gravity this way, in this direction. This should inspire all these options, and of course you don't need to take them. You can fight against them or do the reverse or work only within a group. This just gives you yet another perspective for compositional creativity. So there's some practical implications that you can do. Explore these simple or even complex tonic subdominant dominant relationships or substitutions and interchange within them. Here they are laid out. So for example, we could take one from each group and write quite diatonic music, but that is surprising. For example, we could take A flat and pair it with the A flat minor, the parallel, and then move to another group, maybe choose D flat major and minor, and then E flat major or minor. So we just have a sort of representative from each group and structure a piece harmonically in that way, in any style, such as this one. This is made up of all three groups with representatives from each. Here's another simple idea we might try. For example, we might want to create a groove that just pivots between two of these fields, two of these groups. So we might pick, I don't know, this one, the F and the B flat, rather than just spinning between them. And we can do it in a kind of almost rock style without a major or minor third. But rather than just doing two, we could go F to B flat and then pick any of these others to any of these. So we could go F to B flat and then maybe D to D flat, or maybe F to B flat and then we'll take this one, A flat, and then to that one, D flat. Just keep looping that until we want to get to a high point where we'd use the final group. It's called tonic here, but it will feel more like a dominant actually. And we could pick, let's say, the C, which feels good, or maybe the F sharp. Yeah, that's good. I don't know, it might work. one final example, which is particularly apt, is Giant Steps by John Coltrane. The slippery harmonic sequence seems to cover a whole range of keys really quickly. But if we break it apart, we can see that if this is in the key of B, then these join together. Then we have G, which is a tonic to subdominant, and then E flat, which is in the dominant key. And these cycle through. The spiral is kept throughout. So we can see this pitch axis system being used in a range of styles and possibilities for you. So your job as a composer is to apply or adapt the Bartok pitch axis, the harmonic wheel, and these Bartok functions in your own music, using your own perspective and creativity. I hope you enjoyed this. Next time we'll be looking at the octatonic scale, which is related deeply with this, as well as other systems for your compositional craft.